Our neighbour Sri Lanka, viewers, is neck deep in a severe economic downturn. This meltdown since its independence in 1948, and things are not looking good at all. It's only getting worse. There is curfew in the capital Colombo after protests broke out, civil unrest, many say fueled by the opposition as well, but a strong sense of discontent on what the country is witnessing. Sri Lankan army has been deployed at every petrol station to help orderly distribution of fuel, while men and women wait in the longest of queues. Most of them fainting is what we're getting to know. Here's a report on the economic mess unfolding in the island nation.
Angry Sri Lankans took to the streets in the capital, Colombo, protesting against the soaring prices of essentials and shortages of everything from food to fuel. The protesters were tear-gassed and showered with water cannons. Across Sri Lanka, citizens are feeling the growing pain of the country's worst economic crisis in years.
I have to travel to work in Colombo. A litre of petrol that used to cost 120 rupees 3 months ago now costs 254. It is very difficult for us to manage, as I need to always pump petrol to go to work.
In the past 3 months, fuel prices have increased 3 times, while essential food items have doubled. Sri Lankan police said the 2 men collapsed and died while waiting in separate queues to secure fuel amid the skyrocketing prices. For weeks, people have been queuing up at pumps, often for hours, and the country has been under rolling power cuts.
Yesterday, it was a 10-hour power cut. Today, they say it will be 13 hours. The fish and the meat in the fridge and the children's milk have gone bad. The child is crying, saying it is very hot. We ask the government to give us some sort of a break.
The island nation of 22 million is struggling with power cuts for up to 13 hours a day, as the government is unable to make payments for fuel imports because of a lack of foreign exchange.
With
the power cuts, there is nothing we can do. Our sausages will go bad. This is usually the time we get business. But when there are 13-hour power cuts, we can't do our business. The meat is kept in deep freezers. But to sell them, we must have the meat in display cabinets.
Historically weak government finances, badly timed tax cuts, and the COVID-19 pandemic, which pummeled the tourism industry and foreign remittances, have wreaked havoc on the Sri Lankan economy.
At this rate, not only me, but most Sri Lankans will have to starve and die of starvation. Even if you have money, there are no goods to buy. And there are things to buy, but there is no money. There are queues for fuel, milk powder and gas.
The rapid drain of Sri Lanka's dollars has left it struggling to pay for critical imports, as currency reserves have slumped 70% in the last 2 years to $2.31 billion. However, Sri Lanka has to repay about $4 billion in debt in the rest of this year, including a $1 billion international sovereign bond that matures in July. Deprived of basic amenities, Sri Lankans are raging. Massive demonstrations against the government's handling of the crisis were witnessed across the capital. Cops clashed with hundreds of protesters in Colombo after vandalism and arson by the protesters. Agitators set ablaze a bus in the capital city, forcing cops to resort to water cannon and tear gas.
People are not even eating 2 of the 3 meals a day. They just eat 1 meal. We don't know when these problems will end. Don't know at which point the country will take to the streets and rebel.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has chalked out a plan to work with IMF to end the crisis.
Yesterday's discussions with the International Monetary Fund was also held for this purpose. Through those discussions, we hope to find a way to pay off our annual loan installments, sovereign bonds, and so on. Subsequent to my discussions with the International Monetary Fund, I have decided to work with them after examining the advantages and disadvantages.
The Indian Ocean island nation is battling a foreign exchange crisis that forced the devaluation of its currency and hit payments for essential imports such as food, medicine and fuel. Bureau Report, India Today.
So while Sri Lanka facing this economic downturn, we're going to get into the economics and the politics of it in a short while. But I want to connect to two citizens that we are joined by from Sri Lanka to get an actual sense of what is the sense on ground. Rehan Jayavikram, former mayor, Weligama, joins us, as well as Indrajit Samarajiva. He is an author. Mr. Samarajiva, if I might start with you. You know, we connected earlier on over social media, and you actually told me you have to save on your battery pack to be able to make it to our show. How bad really is it? Because we are reading these horror stories where, you're out of food, you're out of medicine, you're out of power, you can't even go through elective surgery. How bad really is it?
So I'll start by, excuse me, I'll start by saying that I'm one of the lucky ones. We're actually quite rich, so we can adapt around it. But a lot of people are really suffering. But for us, the impact is, as you can hear from my voice, I'm sick, I'm sleep deprived, my children didn't sleep well last night, but we have food on the table and we're able to get by. But a lot of people are really not doing very well at all. I would say my experience last night, we just had a power cut all night. And so the children don't sleep. And then my son wakes up and just screams at me. And then I told my son another time that, the president's house has power. And then my son screamed at him. And I think that's the attitude everyone in this country has right now, young or old, because we're really suffering. And then we don't see our leaders being there with us. And we see them as, in fact, causing this problem.
Mr. Samarajiva, I want to ask you, there is so much being said about, the civil unrest. We can see it as we're speaking with you, on screen. How much is it actually organic, where there is this strong discontent, where now the first family of your country is concerned?
I would say it's very organic. I feel very angry. This affects everyone. This is not like a distant conflict, or it's not a distant problem. This affects everyone directly. Energy feeds into every part of our lives. We can't take our children to school. We can't keep food cold. We can't feed our children. We can't move. We can't run businesses. This affects every single person. There have been other problems which have affected certain communities or certainly poor people, but this is affecting everyone across all strata of life. Even wealthy people who live in an apartment building, suddenly they don't have a generator operating, and then they have to climb up 20 floors. So they can't turn away from this problem. Minorities and the poor have always been telling us that these problems have been happening, but this is a problem which affects everyone. And I'd say the tension is very strong in Sri Lanka right now. I'm very angry. Everyone I know is very angry. This is hurting us directly. Our children are crying.
Can you give us a sense of what you're seeing on the streets, Indrajit?
So the president's house is a kilometer from mine. So just down the street in the other direction, people have been holding silent, peaceful protests, not silent, but peaceful protests for 31 days now. All of the major political parties have come out and protested peacefully. Even the protest at the president's house, look, I understand that, and my son understands that. Why are his lights on when ours are off? So it's good that people went there. And then they talk about, look, the violence really came from the police side. They used water cannons, they used tear gas. They put 40 of us in cages. We didn't put any of them in cages. So, this is all violence being done to us. Even these daily acts of deprivation are violence done to us. So I think people have been remarkably peaceful. But that said, how much can we take? It's a lot of pressure. Like, this affects us just on a very human level. We're not sleeping enough. We're not eating well. We're not able to work and live and move. So it's a lot of tension in the city or in the country. It's not just Colombo. Like I said, this is affecting everyone. I would say that it's not like riots in the street. Sri Lanka's safe and we've been through problems before. But look, I think right now we're at the point where, a single spark could turn into a flame. I do think that.
Mr. Samarajiva, I know you're short on power. I'm going to ask you one quick question before I let you go and conserve on that little battery and not waste your time when we go across to other
So actually, I came to my mother-in-law's house where she has a generator. I've been avoiding this for a while, but we finally came in.
All right, I'm going to ask you one very quick question before I let you go. Do you see things getting worse, and how worse is it? Because, like I said, we are reading these horror stories where surgery cannot take place in hospitals. Is that actually happening? Are you completely out of medicine? Is it actually happening on ground?
So I think at the University of Perideni, I think it was, yes, they did report that they were stopping surgeries, but your foreign minister was in the country at that time, and he actually helped intervene and get supplies for that, which we're very grateful for. Sri Lanka's hope is essentially that it rains, and it did rain today, because we have developed our own hydropower energy, and we're of course an ancient agricultural irrigation civilization, and we developed that. But the problem is now we're depending on oil imports for the rest of our power. But if it rains, then we do have some power from that. And then going forward, that is what we really have to focus on. We have to develop our own energy resources, our own production capabilities.
All right, but clearly you don't have any faith in your government right now, at least what we are witnessing and what you are
No, they got to go. I think if the government can't provide power, they don't get to be in power. Like, I'm sorry, that's just the basic.
Well, Indrajit Samarajiva, appreciate you joining us. I hope we don't have to connect with you in the next few days, and you do, and things actually turn for the better. I wish your son a good sleep this evening. I hope it rains. I hope it pours. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you to the people of India. You've actually been very supportive. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that comment. Thank you. I want to now cut across to Rehan Jayavikram. He's the former mayor of Welagama. He's also joining us. Mr. Jayavikram, you do have political connections. We understand that. But as a, what is it that you are actually witnessing right now on the streets of Sri Lanka? Because what we are seeing is highly disturbing.
I think it's astounding scenes, what we're all seeing. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting us to be a part of this show. It's astounding what we're seeing on live television. There are organic protests which are not carried out by any political party. One such group infiltrated the president's residence yesterday, or the access road to his residence. They were treated rather cruelly. They were treated rather unfairly. There was a government orchestrated event, I would say, where one of the buses or one of the vehicles in the protest was set on fire. And that was blamed on the protesters as well. And there are certain videos that have come out which show, certain misdeeds being done by certain government supporters. And it's come to a point where the people really can't take it anymore, because every single thing and every single, what would you say, essential in this country has gone up, starting from the milk powder, which has significantly increased. The gas, there's a severe gas shortage, and even if there's gas, it's almost double or triple the price. There's a severe shortage of diesel, petrol, and fuel in general. There's a massive shortage in kerosene oil, and it's just turning out to be a disaster.
Mr. Jayavikram, it seems to be, with what you're facing right now, the biggest leveler, because even if you have the wealth or the money, the shortage is so acute that you cannot access basic necessities as well. Absolutely.
And the fact that as a main opposition, the fact that we have been telling the government for over a year to go to the IMF, because there have been case studies all over the world. Now, if you look at the situation in Lebanon, and when you look at what's happening in Sri Lanka, it's very much like a parallel universe where it's almost the exact same thing which is happening. So there were prior warnings. And this has been happening in countries like Lebanon since 2018 or 2019. So we had ample time to do case studies. And the fact that the government refused to go to the IMF for over a period of 1 year, it's just shocking. And they just kept on printing money because of the president's lackluster attitude and the massive tax cuts that this government bought on its people. He bought in tax cuts with the hope that, this ruling party will be able to win elections, but that resulted in massive foreign debt and the fact that we can't service these loans and we're almost heading into default. So I think the government knew that this was happening. I really don't know why they didn't take any action, but it's time for them to go home now.
Mr. Jayavikram, I'll ask you one final question. For somebody, I want to get a larger understanding for our viewers. As a common citizen, how did you see the trajectory of this downturn? Because, with a lot of us, it's at least, we are your neighbor. It's hit us in the face where suddenly we see that your country has completely run out of fuel. Completely, there's a power crisis. It's all shut down. Can you give us a trajectory for a common citizen? Has it only amplified in the last few days, or was it slowly coming? The storm was building.
It definitely didn't amplify within the last few days. It's been coming for a year. And it's not just the main opposition, but, various people, economists, even people like Indi Samarajiva, whom you had on the show. All these guys have been telling the government for about a year or about a year and a half that we need to seriously think of restructuring our debt program and going to the IMF. And like I said, the government knew this was coming. And we are very grateful because there were two major problems that happened the other day. One was the serious lack of fuel. And I think your foreign minister visited the IOC, the Indian oil company fuel shed, one of the fuel sheds. And, he promised some sort of relief. And when Peradeniya, the teaching hospital, ran out of essential medical items, where they basically put a halt to all surgeries that were not procedural surgeries, which included, emergency procedures like, people who are elected to get heart surgeries or liver transplants or kidney transplants and all these very important things. They had put a sudden stop, and not a single minister in this government came forward and spoke about this. And it was only the Indian foreign minister who issued a statement about it. So that just shows the severity of how one-sided and how blatantly this government shows a lack of empathy towards its own people, where the Indian foreign minister has to intervene before any of our ministers intervene.
All right, Mr. Jayavikram, appreciate you joining us. Thank you. Once again, we hope that, things pipe down early and, the country's on a better path sooner than later. Appreciate you joining us, sir. Thank you there. Meanwhile, while India has come up to help Sri Lanka, and that's something that is echoed through these two conversations that we've had as well. What about China? Because clearly, for China, Sri Lanka is a very keen business interest. There has been a lot of talk, viewers, about no aid from China as Sri Lanka battles its worst economic crisis so far. But is Xi Jinping's administration being questioned? Let's tell you about China's debt trap on the island nation. Now, Colombo's debt repayment to Beijing amounted to nearly $2 billion. This is not all. China also accounts for a whopping 30% of Lanka's FDI. Chinese government has also invested $12 billion in Lankan infrastructures. Beijing is also developing special economic zones in the country. China gave $1.1 billion loan for giving Humban Tota on lease for 90 years. China harboring engineering company is also building Colombo Port City project. This is not all. Beijing is also building 3.9 billion oil refinery near the capital of Colombo. One would think that despite so much of investment, why has China completely shied off helping their business partners, what they call it, at a time of acute crisis, acute need? Let's cut across to our guest this evening. I have Harsha De Silva. He is member of the Parliament, Sri Lanka. I have Skand Tayal, former diplomat. I have Anand Srinivasan, economist. I want to, with the permission of our other guests, I want to cut across to Mr. De Silva first. Mr. De Silva, a lot of talk. You come from the opposition party right now. There is a lot of talk, and it is being alleged that it is your party that is trying very hard to foment civil unrest through these protests, which are being pushed as possibly organic, but are political in nature.
As a matter of fact, the protests that are happening now have not been instigated by us, but by civil society groups. They have been organizing these protests on WhatsApp and Telegram groups, and they are coming together. These are middle-class people, they are students, they are housewives, they are professionals. And it started about 2 weeks ago with people holding candles along the main roads, but it has now become a much bigger force. People are gathering, and it's pretty much getting out of control. And of course, the opposition is trying to keep it civil and without violence. And even though we are not organizing it, they have our absolute support. because as an opposition, we are supposed to have people bring the problems to the government and tell them to resolve the
But
problems
Mr.
they
De Silva,
created for the
how
people.
tacit is the support given by your party, SJP? Because, your own Facebook page where the SJB asked people to come out in large numbers and challenge the government and the president.
Well, those are individual MPs who've done that, but we've issued a statement saying that the party has nothing to do with any of these protests, but we are certainly supportive of the protests.
Mr. De Silva, what, according to your party, is the reason that has led to this crippling economic downturn of your country?
Absolute mismanagement of the economy, not understanding how to resolve problems, and just absolute, I think, what's the word I'm looking for? Selfishness and thinking that they know how to handle a situation when they actually don't. So incompetence and callous disregard for professional advice.
Also what is being talked about, not just in India, but as well in Sri Lanka as well, for a country like China, which has such huge business interests in your very country, is quite shy of helping you out in this acute time of crisis, Mr. De Silva. It seems India country is doing a lot more.
Actually, they haven't pumped in so much money to relieve us of our debt. It has been India who's been helpful to us in this last month or so. By extending credit lines, by giving swap lines, by postponing payments due through the Asian Clearing Union. And Indian Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar was here just a couple of days ago, and he apparently has said, okay, they will support us even more. And certainly they are supporting the people of Sri Lanka, not the government.
I'll ask you one quick final question, Mr. De Silva. The fact is that you said that China has not done more. Why do you think China is not doing more? Is it to further entrench your country into a debt trap, which at least many economists are looking at in terms of just by the sheer way of investment?
I cannot say China hasn't helped. What I'm saying is China has not been as forthcoming as India in the last few weeks when we have fallen to these depths. They have said, look, we are not able to restructure our debt, but we will reschedule them in such a way that we will give you more money to pay back our loans, but we have to make sure that you pay our loans on time. So that's the reality here.
All right, Mr. De Silva, appreciate you joining us. Mr. De Silva, an MP of the SJP, the primary opposition in Sri Lanka, speaking with us. Well, then, other than its huge debt obligations, one of the other reasons that's touted to be where Sri Lanka finds itself, especially in acute food shortage, is changing its agrarian policy. Let's cut across right now to our guest. I have Mr. Thayal, former diplomat, and Anand Srinivasan, economist. Mr. Srinivasan, the fact that Sri Lanka switched its agrarian policy to a more organic one of the reasons as well for the downturn?
Definitely, because there were three big reasons for the downfall of the Sri Lankan economy. One was, of course, what the farmer described, that they switched to a organic farming, hoping that they would capture world markets for their organic products. It completely fell flat on their face, and their production dropped by 40%. A lot of people have been warning the Sri Lankan government about this, and in spite of that, Gotabaya Rajapaksa took this decision of going organic and staying with it for 6 months. It is going to take years for Sri Lanka to recover from this problem. Even basic necessities like rice, sugar have now to be imported. Already Sri Lanka was a net importing nation. More than this, Sri Lanka's major export is tea, and tea production has dropped. Tea production has dropped by 50%, and therefore their foreign exchange, which would have come through tea exports, has vanished. And because they don't have foreign exchange, they have not been able to service their debt. So this organic farming is directly responsible for fall of tea exports. Also, COVID made sure that there would be no tourists in Sri Lanka. These are the two major foreign exchange earners of Sri Lanka. So you don't have tourists, you don't have tea exports for 2 years, and this is what happened. At the same time, you had used the cutback on production of food, which had to be imported in more quantity. Therefore, they don't have enough foreign exchange to meet their import covers. And this is the crisis that Sri Lanka faces today.
You know, as we're going to pull out those graphics that we were showing our viewers on, the kind of investments that China has made in Sri Lanka, and I want to bring in and appreciate the patience, sir. Mr. Thayil, he's a former diplomat. At this point of time, where Sri Lanka is also admitting to a fact that India is doing a lot more than possibly, somebody like a China is. Should India see this as an opportunity to make those amends?
First, Sri Lanka is a friend, it's a neighbor. It's very painful for any Indian to see the kind of hardships which are being faced by the people of Sri Lanka. And naturally, government of India, people of India will try to do whatever they can to mitigate these hardships. And that is what is being done, has been done. $2.5 billion worth of assistance already given, $1 billion line of credit. I think some diesel is being sent at a very emergency basis. Foreign Minister Mr. Jaishankar was there, and he personally saw the kind of difficulties people are facing. So whatever India can do, that is being done. And yes, it is, when we say neighborhood first policy, sometimes some neighbors have had some misunderstandings, some grievances against India. And it is for India, people of India, to be always magnanimous and try to help the neighboring countries, and not really delving into that how they had behaved or what some policy decisions they might have taken or some action they might have taken which may not have been to our liking. So I think this is India's role. We are the biggest country in South Asia, and this is what is being done.
But Mr. Thayil, I want to ask you, the fact is, how worried should actually India be? Because the kind of investment one sees of China, in Sri Lanka is very worrying, for especially the proximity that Sri Lanka has with us. And this could very well, it's a time of acute crisis for Sri Lanka, and to talk about it in a very plain, simple terms, but it's also an opportunity for India to possibly, and we are doing it. The fact that we had a foreign minister there, we are sending them, stuff which they need desperately, is an opportunity for India to actually, fill in that role, which possibly China could take.
India has its own strengths, its own attitude, its own empathy. And China is more business-like. China, even BRI, when they talk about $50-40 billion or more, it is mostly investment. They do not give grant assistance so much. And perhaps the interest rate is lower than LIBOR. But it is all money which China will take back from that country, which Sri Lankans have seen in Hambantota. And some of the infrastructure projects which China has initiated in Sri Lanka, they will not have economic return for many, many years to come, decades to come, in fact, in airports, etc. So ultimately, all that burden will be borne by the people of Sri Lanka, and the returns will have to be made from the general budget of Sri Lanka. So Sri Lankans are watching. They are intelligent people. They understand what is going on. And India is in their close proximity. India is right here. So India has its own logic and its own credibility and its own strength. And Sri Lankans should be mindful of that.
Right. All right, Mr. Srinivasan, I'll ask you one quick question before I move on, and appreciate both you gentlemen for joining us. How does Sri Lanka actually climb its way out of this debt mess?
What they need is, first they need an economist finance minister, not somebody from the family. The family obviously cannot be the prime minister, president and the finance minister. That's what it is today. And they need an economist. Like in 91 we brought in Dr. Singh, They need to bring a economist finance minister. They need to go to the IMF and they need to restructure their debt. It is not fair to blame China alone because they have gone to the international markets and borrowed in the international market. $35 billion is floating debt on the market, of which $6.1 billion is due in the next 1 year. And that is the pressure point. So what they need to do is they need to default on their debt. They have to borrow some $10 billion from the IMF, take stringent corrections. That means devaluing the rupee further, the Sri Lankan rupee. The Sri Lankan rupee is now 297 to a dollar, maybe drop by another 25 to 30%, and go for a restructuring, because Sri Lanka does not have any major manufacturing. It does some garment exports. It does not have a major manufacturing base, nor does it have great services exports like what India has in terms of IT. It is primarily dependent on tea and tourism. So they need to broad base their revenue stream, and they need to go to the IMF like yesterday, like the gentleman told you. And maybe India can also aid. If I were in government, I would have because $35 billion is not a lot of money for India. India has more than $500 billion in forex reserves, so India can bail out, and India should seize the opportunity to bail out Sri Lanka at this point of time.
All right, appreciate you both gentlemen for joining us. We're going to keep a keen eye. We're going to get boots on ground, get you the very latest reports filtering in from our neighbor island nation, Sri Lanka. Till then, prayers for the citizens who are actually dealing with a crippling economic downturn. Thank you all for joining us.